thinking, I think my lesson I'm going to use is symmetry in math, because symmetry, even though it's math, symmetry, there's lots that you could connect with, like symmetry and Christianity and biblical integration. So I'm going to think about that. But as you know, I've been coloring, and look at this beautiful koi fish picture I've been doing. And you want to look down here, Luther is well, you can't see. Luther is sleeping next to me and is happy. Okay, so we're on chapter 8, and I just dropped over some pens. That's awesome. We like it when that happens. Not really. Okay, here we go. Hopefully it doesn't glitch. It's so funny because it glitches sometimes and then not so much. I don't know. Okay, we're in chapter 8. Yes. What integration is not? Ooh, maybe more weird lessons that are staged. Yes.
Now sometimes we learn more from negative examples than we do from positive examples.
Okay, here we go.
We want to talk now about what integration is not. Here's what not to do. Don't just make associations with Bible verses. Now, to get a real good feel for what we're talking about, one of the Cascade Christian School teachers thought up a lesson plan to illustrate the pitfall of making associations. So let's watch this example of what not to do.
Good morning, guys. Today we're going to be learning a little bit more about fish and their anatomy. But first, before we do that, let's take a look in the Bible and see if the Bible says anything about fish. So I want you guys to look in the Bibles and see if you can find any verses that pertain to fish. Yes.
Genesis 1:26 says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move among the earth."
Now, what does that tell us about fish?
That we need to take responsibility and care for the fish and the environment.
Did anybody else find a verse? Yes, Cooper.
Jonah 1:17. But the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish 3 days and 3 nights.
Now, Cooper, what does this tell us about fish?
That God used a fish to teach Jonah a lesson.
A lesson in obedience. That sounds familiar. Let's take one more. Anybody else have a good fish verse? Yes, Jillian.
And Luke 5:8-11, and it says, "When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said..."
Excellent. That is a great passage. Now, Jillian, what does that tell us about fish?
I think it teaches us that being a pastor is better than being a fisherman.
Okay, we can go with that. Fish have obviously been around for a long time. We just read a verse that says they were in Genesis, in the very beginning of creation. So fish is obviously an important topic for us to discuss today.
Okay, now what would you say was the basic academic content or focus of this lesson? And he stated it right at the beginning. What was the basic content?
The anatomy of fish.
Fish anatomy. And when you look at all these verses, did any of the verses really have anything to do with fish anatomy? No. Well, maybe the Jonah verse, if you stretched it a little bit and kind of filled in the blanks. They do have a stomach, okay. But that's a stretch, okay. Now, yeah, the academic objective was clearly stated as fish anatomy, but the verses were just thrown in as kind of, well, we're at a Christian school, let's see what the Bible says about fish. And it was a disconnect. Now, some people would say, well, isn't that integration? And our answer is no. Just putting in verses does not mean you're integrating the academic content with the bigger picture of reality. And that we call, throwing in verses, we just call making associations. The second area we want to talk about, which is one of the most difficult of all areas for Christian school teachers, is the habit of making object lessons. This is such a common pitfall that many Christian school teachers have been doing this and not realizing that it's not genuine integration. Now, it's easy to fall into this pit, and this pit can be avoided And the way it can be avoided is to make sure that your integration objective is congruent with your taking object lessons. This is such a common pitfall. Integration objective is congruent with your academic objective. Make sure that that academic content that you mention in your integration objective is the very same academic content that's in the step 2 academic objective statement. Now we're going to watch an example, a staged example of an object lesson. But before we do, I want to share with you specifics congruent with your that academic content. Share with you specifically the difference between an object lesson and integration. First of all, an object lesson illustrates a lesson about something other than the subject matter. Something other than the subject matter. Now, integration, on the other hand, directly relates to the subject matter. And by the way, there are some blanks in your participant guide, which you should be filling in right now. Okay. Secondly, an object lesson usually is an analogy or an allegory. But when it comes to genuine integration, it's not an analogy or an allegory. Very, very rarely would it ever even come close to that. Now, thirdly, an object lesson is used to make spiritual truths more memorable and more meaningful. Now, we're not saying that object lessons are bad, and we're not telling you to never do an object lesson. There are times and places where object lessons are fitting, but that's not integration. They're two radically different things. Integration is used to make the subject matter more significant. Like in the case we just saw, fish anatomy is what we want to make more significant. We don't want to use that as an opportunity to talk about a spiritual truth. Finally, an object lesson reveals the glory of God, or it reveals the purpose of God or the mind of God in relation to something other than the academic subject matter. And of course, on the flip side, integration reveals the glory of God, the purpose of God, the mind of God in relation to the subject matter as an opportunity to talk about a spiritual mind of God, an example of a classic object lesson. Here's what not to do.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be continuing our lesson on famous American inventors. Now, in your reading last night, who do we attribute to inventing the light bulb? Yes, Ike. Thomas Edison, that's correct. All right, Thomas Edison was one of those crazy scatterbrained inventors. He invented a lot of things, including the gramophone. Now, what makes the light bulb work? Yes. Electricity, it does. That does make the light bulb work, but it doesn't necessarily cause the bulb to emit light. What gives off the light portion? Yes, Natalie. The filament. That's correct. Thomas Edison invented the filament that goes inside the light bulb, and when the electricity travels through the filament, it emits light. What does the Bible say about light? Shelby, yes.
Jesus is the light of the world.
That's right. Jesus is the light of the world. And if Jesus is the light of the world, then you guys need to ask yourself, what is the light in your life?
Okay. Now, when this teacher came to the integrative part of the lesson, the focus at that part was not on the light bulb. It was on Jesus is the light of the world. Now, we're not saying that the kids don't need to know that Jesus is the light of the world. Of course, they do need to know that. It would depend on what the teacher teacher's academic objective was. For example, if this was part of a Bible class and the academic objective was the students will comprehend or appreciate the fact that Jesus is the light of the world, then it would be very appropriate to bring in a light bulb, plug it in, talk about how it works and the effect of the light bulb on our lives and all kinds of analogies there to Christ. But in the context of this class, I don't know if this was a history class about Thomas Edison or a science class about the light bulb, but in that context, the little sermonette just didn't fit. And the kids know that it didn't fit. And we don't want to be throwing in little sermonettes into those lessons, and it really turns them off. Now, let me share with you one more example. In the context of this class, I don't know, and it really plants. It was second grade. The content, academic focus here, the content, was the cohesion of water. Now, the lesson plan went like this. She said, start off by reviewing the water cycle, talk about the amazing properties of water, and then do an experiment. And the experiment was to give each student a penny and a little glass of water and a straw. And they were to put the straw in the water, put their thumb on the straw, pull the straw out of the water, and drop one drop at a time, drop water on the penny. And the illustration here was water cohesion, because if you've ever done that, it actually builds a little dome on the penny. Well, here was her integration statement. We can be like water drops and build each other up through Christian love and encouragement. Now, the disconnect here is that a little lesson on Christian love and encouragement really doesn't help the students to see water cohesion from a biblical perspective. What she actually wants them to do is to see that phenomenon in the context of either God or creation or humanity, moral order or purpose. Probably the most likely place to go in a situation like that would be to help them to see that this is a designed aspect of creation that is inherent in water for specific purposes that God had for water. And you could actually spend quite a bit of time, if this was an upper level lesson, talking about what purpose water cohesion has, if you wanted to go to purpose, or how it was designed. So, but to actually use it as an object lesson to talk about sticking together, just missed the boat.
All right, everyone. That was what not to do. Oh, that was creative, though. Okay, and you know what? I think we'll just have one more chunk, and then we'll be done with this. Okay. Yeah. So, do you like my drawing? That question was lame.